Strengthen your understanding of governance and policy design. The 12-week graduate course in public policy begins 10th January 2026. Apply by 30th November 2025 to avail a 10% early bird scholarship.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome everyone to All Things Policy. I am Astha, Program Manager for Defense and Foreign Affairs. Today we are diving into an area that quietly determines the fate of criminal investigations, forensic capacity and crime scene management. With a new legal mandate requiring forensic experts to attend major crime scenes by 2029, states now have a ticking clock. But the real question is, are we building this capacity where it actually matters at the police station level? I am joined today by Devina Sikdar, who has been researching how frontline policing intersects with forensic reforms. She was a fellow of the Law Enforcement and Policing Fellowship of 2024-25 cohort, and her paper won the Best Paper Award for the first cohort of the fellowship LEPF. So, Devina, over to you. I would like you to introduce yourself. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Astha, for having me on the podcast. A huge fan. To everybody listening, my name is Devina Sikdar. I am a forensic scientist by training, but a forensic scientist who, for most of her life, has worked outside laboratories in the policy and reform space. Most of my work has centered around litigation, figuring out where wrongful convictions are happening based on forensics, doing research on forensic science laboratories and what the gaps are. And recently, I've moved towards training and stakeholder capacity. And that has led me to my current role, where I am a faculty member at a newly established institute called the Police Institute of Forensic Science in West Bengal, where for the first time in India, we train police constables on crime scene management. So our first cohort of 106 police constables actually graduated in September of this year. And they're soon going to be deployed within crime scene units in the state to actually get onto the front lines of crime scene management, as Astha rightly pointed out in the beginning of the podcast.
So, it's such an interesting line of work. And one is that we don't talk of forensics much. And the thing is that the idea of forensics that we all have is we've seen all these crime shows
Yes,
internationally, and Indian, the media exposure and all that we have is, I don't see much happening around it. It's mostly about chasing people, getting them, and all that. So forensic
absolutely.
is the basic of it, right? So let's get into it. So my first question to you would be, why has forensic capacity become a central issue in policing and justice policy now? Why it has become only relevant now? And also because it seems like a little late in the day, why it seems like an afterthought and not the first thought? So,
Actually, brilliant question, Astha. I think as a person who's worked in this space, I often ask myself that question, why isn't everybody talking about it? I think historically speaking, what has also happened is we have relied heavily on different methods of policing. It's not really taken the imaginations of people historically, but that has changed. In fact, in the last 10 years, the amount of policy and the funding that's been given to forensic science has been huge. So, yes, compared to other places globally, we are a little late to the race. I will admit it, but that's definitely shifted. And I think one of the biggest reasons, to answer your question in terms of why it's happening, one of the biggest reasons I think would be just in terms of how crimes have evolved, right?
mhm.
The nature of criminal activity has evolved to a degree where people now realize there needs to be a lot more scientific intervention. And also, there is a realization that we have forensic capacity and it needs to be used better, which has also, I think, in a lot of ways come up in the way our law has changed.
Right.
So, the criminal laws that got introduced last year, they actually, in their mandate, have very heavily focused on the use of forensic science,
Mhm.
which suddenly makes it now the most relevant thing, right? Because now you have a law that has come up, There's a lot more funding. There's a lot more eyeballs on the subject. So obviously everybody's talking about it, and I'm happy that everybody is finally talking about it.
Yeah. So the other thing that stands out for me is that why is there a mandate of 2029? What is it about 2029? Why there is a at this timeline of you have to achieve certain goals by 2029? Is there a reason why we are leading up to that year, and these activities, how are they actually contributing to for us to reach there?
Right. So, what actually happened was in 2024, when the new criminal laws came up, right? The Criminal Procedure Code, which is now the BNSS,
Mm-hmm.
it had an objective which said that forensic science now needs to be used more. That was one of the primary objectives of the new Criminal Procedure Code, or the BNSS.
Yeah.
And what it also did was, in its section 176, it mandatorily introduced the need for a forensic expert to come to a crime scene, and for offenses which were punishable by 7 years or more. So, for any serious offense, now the law requires a forensic expert to come to a crime scene and to collect and secure the evidence. Just to clarify, this was a mandate that was not present before. So there
Oh.
was no legal requirement like this before in our laws,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what that meant, that historically it was the investigating officer who was present at a crime scene
Mm-hmm.
who would take a call as to how they would manage a crime scene, right? So the IOs, based on their expertise and experience, would at times just guide the police constables or the officers that were below them to collect the evidence. If the IO thought that this was a serious crime or a little bit more complicated or quote unquote high profile, they would requisition somebody from the State Forensic Science Laboratory to come and help with the crime scene management, right?
Mm.
So it was a very ad hoc basis of crime
Okay.
scene management, completely driven by what the IO thought they needed or what they could do. Now, what this law does is now it makes it a mandatory thing, right? For any criminal offense that is punishable by 7 years or more, you would need somebody who's known as a forensic expert. And obviously, that is not an IO to come and collect the evidence.
Right.
The 2029 mandate comes in place because the law has an inbuilt requirement that any of these procedures need to that are now being introduced in the law, they need to be implemented by 2029. So the states have now, I think, 4 years. We're end
Okay.
of 2025, so 4 years to implement this.
Sure. So, what I hear is basically like earlier it was not very defined. There was no protocol in place. And what this BNSS thing has done is that it has brought in a system in place. So, now with these guidelines, you have to have somebody there for the investigation. If it's the what you call intensity of crime seems viable for it to be investigated by a forensic science expert. So, I am somebody who've just started to explore this. Help me understand. So, my understanding, or maybe probably generally, a lot of people would understand that even police, in some capacity, would be taught, or like when they join the forces, that you have to at least secure the crime scene before an expert arrives. Has that been in place, or that is now coming in place because of this mandate?
So, okay, there are two parts of the question. One is the training, and one is the implementation of
Yes.
it, right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of police training, what happens historically in India, higher ranking officers who would eventually be investigating officers, they have a lot more training when it comes to forensic science because obviously they are in charge of the investigation. But again, that training isn't necessarily in depth. So they'd have workshops, say maybe in a year, couple of workshops, maybe an online lecture session with the State Forensic Science Laboratory, right? Where they're taught what the basics of crime scene management are and the securing of a crime scene and evidence collection, right? So that is one part of training, but this is specifically to the IOs. Now,
Oh.
as I said, like IO is a singular person, right? They're a singular entity. They require officers below them to be able to secure a crime scene, right? Which means these are constables.
Mm-hmm.
Now, historically, police constables haven't been really trained in forensic science, right? And this is personally from my experience having done this training in West Bengal, right?
Yeah.
Before this training, none of the police constables had any idea what forensic science or crime scene management meant.
Mm-hmm.
They were being led by whatever the IO was telling them,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
They have, like, police constables, once they're recruited, they have a 6 months training in their state police academies, which is heavily steered towards law and order duties. investigation and crime scene management of forensics plays very minimal role in that training, right?
Okay. Okay.
So from this training, we lead to the implementation part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a singular entity who is the IO, right? Based on how much they can translate and articulate to the officers working below them, they implement it. So sometimes if the IO is great at what they do, they can articulate that, they'll be saying, okay, you have 5 constables, secure the evidence like this or secure a crime scene like this. But if they can't articulate that, which can also happen because they are obviously pulled in different directions,
Mm-hmm.
that means this crime scene management doesn't really work effectively because
Right.
the the police constable is waiting for instructions from an IO. So
Mm-hmm.
that is where the issue is, because the system isn't really well established, the training hasn't happened that way. And obviously this mandate, what it really is doing is pushing people to think about it more cohesively.
Mm.
I think crime scene management sort of falls through the gaps. People think about forensic science just in the laboratories, and crime scene management is okay, it's happening.
Right. Right.
So I think this is forcing people to think about it a little bit more cohesively.
Sure. Makes sense. So then my next question would be, so when you look at crime scene management today, what does the ground reality in most police station looks like right now, like at present, after the mandate has come in? So
Okay, so historically, what has happened was there wasn't a lot in terms of infrastructure. Training we've already covered. In terms of infrastructure, like basic things like having gloves or masks, those protection equipments, PPEs, what we'd call, then simple kits. Now, I do want to sort of set a cautionary sort of caveat here. It's
yeah.
I can't speak for all states across India, right? Some states obviously they're doing better in terms of their facilities and infrastructure. I'm talking generally, and again from my experience working in the states that I'm working, it's not uniform, right? They don't have PPEs, kits aren't regularly available. Again, one of the biggest things that is a problem is malkhanas or storerooms.
Okay.
So, evidence collection at the crime scene doesn't necessarily mean that it's transported to the lab immediately,
Hmm.
right? Sometimes the lab from the crime scene is like districts away or like cities away. For different reasons, there is a lot of wait time, right? There's a recent scientific paper which looked at 142 trial court judgments specifically to rape and murder cases in India. And they saw that where DNA evidence was collected in these cases, the exhibits took in more than half case, like more than half of these cases, the exhibits reached laboratories after a month, right?
Right.
One in
Yeah.
one third cases, it was close to 2 months, right? So that's the reality of how the exhibits are also moving, right? So that means the police
Huge
station,
lag.
yeah, exactly. And these are biological evidences, right?
Yeah,
They're the most,
because chemicals will mess them up. You will not get the right outcome. You will not be able to get anything out of these samples. So, okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that means they need to be stored somewhere, right?
Mm.
And notoriously, police malkhanas aren't really equipped to handle these things, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is a big infrastructure issue, right? So it is not just the kits in terms of unavailability of kits for collection, it's even about the storage capacity of these things.
Yeah.
We are seeing some of the states trying to improve that. Within the state of West Bengal, there's already been conversations about figuring out how to make sure kits are being introduced across different districts and like revamping of malkhanas, at least centrally within a district, not necessarily every police station, but if there can be, ways in which that can be revamped. So
Mm.
these conversations are happening, and I'm assuming, or at least I'm hoping very, optimistically that by 2029, all of these things are resolved.
Okay. Okay. Sounds fine. Yeah. So moving on. So now my question is more on terms of infrastructure. So India in the past has focused mostly on labs and not so much on the frontline responders. So like my intention here is to basically understand that there are labs and there are hiring, that recruitment that happens for police station. So there's a gap somewhere that I'm able to see that, like I asked you even before, that are they trained? Is the
Right.
infrastructure there? So if there is lab which is in full capacity running these tests which are time sensitive, which need certain kind of storage and everything, so what would be your answer when I ask you that why there was so much focus on building labs and not actually joining this gap we have?
Right. I think that's a very good question. I think an interesting area to think about also, because unfortunately that's the truth, right? My own research has shown me that in the last, years, we've always focused on laboratories, right? I think there are two aspects of it. One, it is required. Like laboratories do the bulk of the thing, right? These are
Yeah.
forensic scientists, they're testing. So we do have to think about their infrastructure, recruitment, and the capacity, right? Which in India is still not the best.
Mhm.
Uh, but again, so the focus, I think, obviously has been there because it's the need of the hour. And I
Mhm.
also feel the second reason why that has happened is it feels like a more shiny thing.
Yeah.
To simplify it, like it feels the most obvious thing. People think about forensic science, and immediately, I think that is the issue, right? Within policy as well. People think about forensics, and the thing that strikes to them the most obviously is a laboratory or a
Yeah.
scientist in a lab coat.
Yeah.
And I think that is an issue in terms of narrative.
Mm.
As people who are working in the space and outside the space, I think we've not been able to connect that forensic science. There are a lot more elements, and it starts at the police station at the frontline level. I think that narrative hasn't been able to come out. And it's only recently that we've seen that happening, whether it's through the change in the criminal law or like some of the guidelines that even the Supreme Court has come up with, that people have realized that, okay, you know, evidence handling at a crime scene is very important, and it's not something that's just going to happen without a lot of effort and policy and reform in that space.
Right. So, in the current state of things that we have, so has the now the capacity of state to train the officials has increased in some ways? Like you just mentioned that you've been training officials. So, has the capacity now increased, and do people also want to put in that effort, right? So, if there is a disjointed infrastructure, I think people need to put in more effort to make sure that the evidences reach labs on time. So,
Right.
what would you say about that? Yeah.
I think there's definitely, like, I feel in a lot of ways the law has been the right sort of kickstart for this change to happen, right? Because this capacity wasn't there. In West Bengal, where I'm training, this institute was established this year for filling this gap, right?
Mm.
In Uttar Pradesh, I think last month itself, I heard that they have also started training constables. They weren't doing it before, right? So
Mhm.
I think this law has started that conversation, and different states are responding to it differently, whether it is through training of constables through a specific certificate course like what we're doing in West Bengal, or whether the state forensic science laboratories in different states taking up that training,
Yeah.
right? So in different ways, the state is sort of responding to it, because I think what has been very clearly established is that the law now mandates this.
Mhm.
Now, the reason why I keep honing back to this is because somewhere down the line, everybody realizes within the criminal justice system that post 2029, right, any criminal case that comes up to court, the accused will have the right to ask whether there was a forensic expert at the crime scene, right? And
Mm.
the judge has then the discretion to sort of dismiss a case if there was no forensic expert present, right?
Okay.
So that, like,
Yeah.
legally, this is a huge thing that's been set out, right? So if this
Absolutely. Yeah.
gap, so if this gap isn't met,
Hmm.
a lot of cases will just fall, right? And I think the seriousness of that has now really set in within the states to fill that gap,
So I'm going to give you a slight pushback on this.
right?
See, the thing is that police officials, as we understand, are already understaffed. Like,
Correct, absolutely,
so if we say like we are training them for forensics, there are new personals are not being added, but the work
right,
is being like they're being burdened with more work. So
absolutely.
my pushback here is basically, or maybe I want to understand what's the load of cases like for each lab, or like I'm not going to say ask you at a police station level, but for such like at a district level or where you have worked, what has been your experience? Because there should be capacity also to handle the load of cases that come in, and also police also should have that bandwidth to do that, to to be able to reasonably cater to it basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a, like, you've hit the nail on the head sort of on this. So, in terms of numbers that you were talking about, okay, so I'll give you one number. In the state of West Bengal, and this is data from last year, right? The cases that would be punishable by 7 years or more, where you require a forensic expert, they're close to 69,000, right?
Mhm.
In 1 year. I'm talking about 1 year in one state, right? So that is one number.
Yeah.
The other number to keep in mind is the state of forensic science laboratories in West Bengal. So the state lab in West Bengal functions at close to 70% vacancy, right?
Mm.
So they
Okay.
are way understaffed within the laboratories. And the second thing to keep in mind is that I think this is the data from 2023. So it's not the most accurate data. They're close to a lakh pendency in
Mm.
laboratories when it comes to cases, right? And it would make sense if you have so much vacancy, right?
Yes.
Again, and these data sets are not the most accurate in terms of like they're not most recent, but the numbers would stay similarly around these figures, right? So now the question is, what should we do? Now, the reason why police officers should be still trained, and I totally agree that they have law and order responsibilities, and especially with a state like ours where you have multiple festivals, you have campaigns, election years, this and that, police officers will always be sort of pulled in for law and order duties. That's where
Yes.
their primary focus would be. So I completely take your point, and we know that recruitment in policing also is facing their struggles. But the reason why police constables should still be trained, right? And I don't want to completely let go of that idea is because irrespective of where the crime happens, right? Invariably, it will be a police officer who is going to be responding first, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We might have like a fire service or an ambulance, but with them, it will be a police officer, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, doing that primary task of securing a crime scene, even if
Mm.
they don't themselves collect the evidence,
Yeah.
that will invariably fall onto a police officer, right?
First responder. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like you mentioned. Yeah.
right. So I think that means that police constables will still need to be trained on that, right?
Mhm.
So what happens with the training that we are doing at West Bengal is that we're trying to make them aware about these situations. Like, okay, in different case scenarios, how would a police constable respond to securing a crime, right?
Mm.
What would that entail? Even if that means securing a crime and waiting for a forensic expert to come in from a laboratory, that's completely understandable, right? But having
Yeah.
that awareness. And that awareness would include in certain cases like, okay, if it's going to rain and it's an outdoor crime scene, how do you cover things, make sure that the evidence isn't
Right.
tampered with or contaminated, right? And
Yeah.
that means invariably, even if it's little, you need the police constables to have the situational awareness and this crime scene management understanding. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think I totally understand, and that is a fear that I have myself, that there is going to be a tension in terms of law and order
Yeah.
responsibilities in a crime scene.
Yeah.
But I think there's a hybrid way of working towards it that can be achieved.
Yeah. So now, like you have experience of working in West Bengal. In your paper, you have compared it with Karnataka. So how are things different here? How are they efficient or maybe not efficient so much in the other areas where West Bengal is doing better? So what has been your learning from that?
So Karnataka model is completely different in the sense of this is driven by the State Forensic Science Laboratory in Karnataka. So
Mm-hmm.
what the State Forensic Science Laboratory in Karnataka has done is they have recruited students from who are masters in forensic science, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their qualification is in forensic science. They've recruited them, and over the course of 2 years, they have trained them in crime scene management, right? So it's been a very extensive training that they've done within the laboratory. They've sent them off to different districts in Karnataka. And after the 2 months training, what they have done is they have attached these scene of crime officers or SOCOs as they're called to different districts of Karnataka, right? So, and over there, like these SOCOs then with the police go and attend a crime scene as and when required. So, the reason this is different is obviously they're completely just doing crime scene work, right? That is it.
Right.
They're not going to be involved in law and order duties. They're forensic scientists by training, so obviously their expertise and understanding is a little better. And this is obviously a 2 years long training that they've done with the forensic science laboratory, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that works in their favor is they're also intuitively aligned to think about, okay, this evidence should be collected in a certain manner because in the lab this is how it will be tested, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Oh, it makes sense. Yeah.
right. So it's a lot more aligned that way. With
Yeah.
police constables, like my experience with in West Bengal, it's a little difficult, right? Because they have science background, but obviously they're not forensic scientists, and I don't have the capacity to train them in forensic science. That's not the intent.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
therefore, to build that intuitiveness for them to understand, okay, I should collect this because this will be important from a laboratory perspective, is obviously going to be not there. Which
Makes yeah, makes so much sense because even my thinking about a crime scene would be like, what are you looking for exactly? And it only
exactly,
comes when you're only when you are trained for it, and it intuitively gets inbuilt in your actions that okay, probably these are things, because a crime scene is a house, and house is
yeah,
a big place, or maybe even a small space. It could be like an open street. What are you
yeah.
looking for? What How can you collect evidences which will then meaningfully add or contribute in building up a case against somebody? So it makes so much sense that when you mention that intuition is required when you are being trained for forensics. So
Exactly. And I really love the fact that you use the term meaningful, because that's the problem, right?
hmm,
So I'm going to backtrack slightly to just explain this crime scene bit a little bit. So there's a report called Forensic Science India Report. It's by Project 39A. The report got published, I think, sometime 2023 or 2022. I don't remember top of my head, but it's
yeah.
available online.
Hmm.
One of the things we did as part of this, and it's one of the biggest reports in terms of forensic science laboratories in India, right? One of the things that we did in this was that we spoke to forensic scientists in laboratories, asking them about, okay, what are the issues that you're facing?
Right.
And the recurring theme across laboratories across the country was that the police don't know how to collect evidence, right?
Hmm.
And these are laboratories that have said that we are training them regularly. Every year we have, some session, some workshop, some classroom, right? We tell them how to collect, how to package, and they either send a lot of things, everything that they see in a crime scene is being sent, or it's not being collected properly. So these were recurring themes across the board, right?
Right.
And that is what I mean by meaningful, right? Because
Hmm.
sometimes what happens, and it is also a cultural thing, right? Police
Right.
officers think that, okay, now I have to collect everything because everything is important,
Hmm.
and if I do this, then like I'm saved. So
Yeah.
like, there's like 100 exhibits being sent to a forensic science laboratory, which is understaffed, which doesn't have
Yeah.
the
Makes no sense then,
right.
because you have over collected things which will not add or contribute in any way to the case, basically. So and it's already an understaffed situation. So
Exactly. Exactly, right. So I think the Karnataka system in that way is really great because they have filled in that gap, right? They've been able to understand that that may be an issue. That
hmm,
if these officers are trained, and that was one of the struggles, right? With
yeah.
my training, that was something that we had to continuously drive home the point that just because you know this doesn't mean you collect everything that you see at a crime scene. You have to figure out what is important, prioritize things.
Hmm,
And over the course of 3 months, training that into police constables is a lot more difficult
hmm,
versus having forensic scientists who intuitively understand the science, how the laboratory function, what would the chemical analysis look like, and
yeah.
then okay, these are the things that I'd prioritize, these are the things that I'd collect. The others
Hmm.
won't really add value to the case, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So I think that way Karnataka system definitely has a leg up.
So, like at an integration level, they're doing a great job because it's like an extended, like a lymph to their own existing body. So it feeds in informative data where they are able to construct a case, a scenario where they're able to finally reach to a conclusion. Okay, this probably happened. This conspired in a particular place. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I have just last one question. What's the biggest misconception policymakers still have about forensic science, like at a policy level? And if a state gets it right by 2029, what would be an ideal scenario? Like, how would it look like? So, two questions, but yes.
Yeah, brilliant questions, by the way. And I think I could talk about the first question for hours in terms of what policymakers get right.
Yeah.
And not to say they get everything right, but I think fundamentally, the one thing that actually sticks out to me is I think when it comes to forensic science, policymakers think, oh, there needs to be money,
Mm-hmm.
right? or if we give money, then it's solved, right?
Yeah.
And I'll go back to what I said when we started the podcast, right? In the last 10 years, India has spent a lot. The union, if we were to look specifically on the budgets when it comes to forensic, the last 10 years, there's been a lot of money that's come forensic science way, right?
Mhm.
In fact, last year, the center came up with another scheme, which is over 2,200 crores only for forensic science infrastructure in India, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's money. That's a lot of money. So
Yes.
I think the issue isn't the money. The issue is that there are fundamental structural gaps in the way we think about forensic science and the issues, right?
Mhm.
Recruitment and infrastructure, there are issues that have existed in the system for decades, right?
Hmm.
Case
Yeah.
pendency and all of these things, right? So money is not the issue. It is figuring
Yeah.
out how we can
Money
channel that
cannot be
money.
inertia. There should be like other systems in place that would, but eventually lead up to that inertia of having things in place. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I think what sort of happens with policymakers is they're not really thinking about it cohesively
Mhm.
in terms of, okay, for example, if this money is there, how do we utilize it, right? What does that mean in terms of the governance structure of laboratories? How does that entail, getting better recruitment done? Or how do we sustain these changes, right? I think that kind of thinking, a long-term thinking within policymakers when it comes to forensic science is missing, which I think is also like testament to the fact that we are not really thinking about forensic science policy in India.
Yeah.
I think forensic science policy, like again, like this is coming from very selfish place because this is the place I work in, but there needs to be a lot more thought put in terms of what are the structures in place, what are the governance, best practices across the world, right? Like these conversations don't really take up space when it comes to
Right.
policymakers because there's a lot that we have to learn. We're fairly nascent when it comes to forensic science policy
Mm.
in India, right? So I think that is one thing that in terms of things that are missing.
Yeah.
And to answer your question in terms of what would 2029 if like somebody does this right, I think my best case scenario would be a combination of a Karnataka West Bengal model.
Hmm.
Because I think, as I said, like I do believe that frontline policing officers need to be trained.
Right.
But they are not the answer, as you
Mhm.
rightly pointed out. They're not the answer to everything. So having a combination of both, which I like in my paper refer to an hybrid or a two-tier model, right?
Mhm.
Where you have a frontline officer who makes sure the crime scene is protected, is pristine, and then you have forensic expert who have mobile forensic vans and all of these facilities with them who respond to these crime scenes and collect the evidence and make sure it's collected and packaged and sent to a laboratory in the correct manner. So I think that would be ideally what I'd like. Also, given the fact that we are a nation where our criminal, we see the numbers ticking up, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
ideally we'd have enough people and enough wherewithal to respond to all these cases um, effectively. So I think, yeah, that would be the ideal scenario, best case scenario that we build up to that by 2029.
Thank you, Devina. That was really an interesting chat we had here. I enjoyed it. And yeah, if you have any closing thoughts, you can be like all over to you. Yeah.
First of all, Asta, thank you so much. I had a lovely time speaking about it. I love talking about forensic policy. So great questions from your end. In terms of last thoughts, I think the last thought that I'd like to leave everyone with, right, is think about forensic policy not as just one thing that's happening in the laboratory. I think it is what's happening at the police station level. It is what's happening within the laboratory, but also what's happening within courts, right? I
Mhm.
think the biggest mistake that we do is we just limit it within the laboratory, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole chain. And forensic science policy in that way needs to be thought through across these things. So we have to figure out what are things that are not working within the police station level, within the police forces, what's not happening within the laboratories, and also understand, okay, how is it playing out within courts? Do lawyers, judges understand it? Because we do have wrongful convictions happening in our country, and a lot of it is based on forensic science, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would be my lasting sort of comment to think about it more holistically. And yeah, please, if you find me on LinkedIn somewhere, please hit me up for a chat. I'm happy to talk about it.
So, for our listeners, this is Devina Sikdar, and we are closing now. One thing I would like to bring up here is applications are open for next cohort of LEPF. You can apply now. For that, visit our website. Thank you for joining us. All Things Policy. See you next time. Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.